Hi, everyone, and welcome back to the Nick Halaris Show. Our guest this week is Mitchell Hora, the CEO of Continuum Ag. Mitchell, welcome to the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Excited to chat.
Likewise, man. I'm a good friend of mine, a big fan of my work. I actually met him through my work, and then I started reading his work, introduced us. Coach Marr, such a great guy. And
Yeah.
I'm glad he made the introduction because I love what you're up to. And I'm excited to kind of dig into a world that honestly most people in the world and definitely in this country don't really understand what's happening because it's become such a kind of a small part of our economy, even though it's like massively important to the health and safety of the country, which is agriculture. So
Yeah, it used to be that you look back in just about everyone's family tree, there was some farmers in there at some point, and now it's like less than 2% of folks are involved in agriculture. And there's a crazy stat, something like 80,000 farms farm like 75% of the production in this country. So
yeah,
now it used to be millions of, families were basically farming for themselves, right? And now with better technology and people not necessarily wanting to be farmers and only be able to maybe feed themselves and a couple other people, things have consolidated like a lot of businesses do. But yeah, a lot
yeah,
of there's disconnect though, right, between folks that are involved in agriculture and a lot of folks that don't have to think about it. Luckily we've got a fairly stable agricultural system that we can produce the food and fiber and fuel and everything else that people want. And most of the folks don't necessarily have to think about the nitty gritty of how it came to be. Um, we just, everybody's got their role to play in the chain.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I want to get into that in a little bit, but before we do that, let's kind of zoom back into what you're doing. I
Yeah.
think it'd be a great place to start the conversation, which is tell us what Continuum Ag is and what you're focused on.
Yeah. Continuum Ag today is a software company that is for farmers. And the long and short of it is we focus on helping farmers quantify and verify their carbon intensity score. Their carbon intensity score is basically their carbon footprint per bushel. So we are able to utilize a calculator that was developed by the United States Department of Energy. It's a calculator called GREET. It's been around since 1995, but only recently it's become very prominent to be a tool that can actually be utilized to help farmers and biofuel producers as we look to decarbonize. So I'm in Iowa. I'm a seventh generation farmer from here in Southeast Iowa. Washington, Iowa is where my office is. Ainsworth, Iowa is the big old town of 600 people. That is the address for our farm. And, we've been farming here for 152 years. The Horas have. So a long time legacy of caring for the soil and trying to grow our crops. And there's been livestock mixed in there historically, but we're still a relatively small family farm. And I've always been very entrepreneurial and been working on the software side of things for a number of years now, helping farmers to better manage their data and tell our story about our impact on the environment, our impact on the world beyond just our little patch of heaven here in Southeast Iowa, but helping farmers better understand what is their real impact from a more holistic global perspective and help farmers decarbonize, help farmers become more sustainable and help them manage their data, get it verified so it's legit, and be able to tell that story in emerging markets like carbon credits and like tax credits.
Yeah, love that. So zooming out, what is the environmental challenge of farming? Like it strikes me as like maybe it doesn't use that much carbon, but maybe I just don't understand the how it
Yeah.
all works. Yeah.
I mean, from a high level, the environment and weather is our biggest challenge every year, right? Is it going to be too hot, too dry, too wet, too cold? Like that year in, year out is the biggest risk on the farm. Always has been, right? From the Dust Bowl back in the 30s and 40s to even before that, to my family started using no-till, really hardcore using no-till back in 1985 because the weather was so extreme at that point that they couldn't harvest their crop in the fall because they got this bad snowstorm and stuff in early. Usually we harvest our crops in like October early November at the latest. But they got snow early back then in the mid 80s. They were not able to harvest their crop in the fall time like they usually do. They had to wait until the spring when the snow melted off and things warmed up. Then they harvested the crop in the spring and didn't have time to do tillage, which usually they would uh, disturb the soil and reincorporate the residue from the previous year's crop, the material that was left over. They didn't have time to do that. They just had to switch right to no-till. And of course, they didn't harvest their crop that they could sell and make money off of. So they had to cut expenses. And so it's kind of crazy that like my family's big dive into change in practices was because of extreme adverse weather back in the mid 80s, but of course it's continued to progress, continuing to see these issues all the time, and more farmers looking at adopting these practices. We've mostly been doing it for water purposes, not necessarily carbon purposes. We've been doing it to be able to hold on to the rainfall that we get, meaning improving our water holding capacity. We're trying to avoid erosion and water leaving our farm because a lot of farms, of course, we're tied into the Mississippi River. And when too much water leaves our farm too quickly, we can cause flooding. We can lose our soil. We can lose the fertilizer that we spent money to put out there. And this leads to adverse conditions downstream with dead zone in the Gulf of Mexico and other pollution problems like that. So a lot of the push historically has been based on water quality and water management. But now, there's more of a focus on our carbon footprint as well. There's tools like the GREET model that I mentioned, and softwares like our topsoil tool that make it more accessible for farmers to be able to quantify their footprint. And the big driver of that is synthetic fertilizer. So all carbon accounting and stuff, and talking about our carbon footprint, it's all based on carbon, right? And carbon equivalence is how they do it, or greenhouse gas equivalence. But it's all tied back to CO2, right? Carbon dioxide. But in reality, CO2 is only one greenhouse gas that we have to be accounting for. It's a big one, but it's only one. Farmers also have to account for methane, which methane is nearly 30 times more potent as a greenhouse gas, or 30 times the greenhouse gas potential than CO2. But nitrous oxide is nearly 300 times more potent a greenhouse gas. So that's why I say synthetic fertilizer is a really important part of the equation for the farmer, because when we apply synthetic fertilizer, like almost all farmers do, it helps us to grow more with less. We apply synthetic fertilizer, but through natural processes and there's still some inefficiencies. Some of that fertilizer is volatilized off or lost to the atmosphere, where it has a really poor impact as a greenhouse gas. The warming potential, like I said, 300 times higher than CO2. So 1 ton of nitrous oxide, the same as 300 tons of CO2. And so farmers have to account for that when we're applying our fertilizer. But fertilizer, diesel fuel, LP, so liquid propane, we sometimes utilize to dry our crop in the wintertime and manage the moisture in the crop. Farmers that use irrigation, they might be using diesel or natural gas, or some of them are electric, but most of them are using some kind of a fuel. But yeah, those type of things. Yeah. And then just natural process too, right? The soil is full of biology. Most biology respires out CO2, just like we do, through natural, biological process, right? We're emitting CO2 all the time. And especially as I'm yapping here, running my mouth, giving way too long-winded answers like I tend to do, I'm emitting a lot of CO2 as I talk, right? Well, the more active our soil is, that soil is also going to be emitting CO2. But we just have to factor that in and keep it in cycle, right? Same as humans. We're not going to not emit CO2 unless we're all dead. It's the only way that as humans we want it. But what we emit, we need to be able to account for that and offset it through other means, right? There's a give and take to everything. So same thing on the farm. And we're just trying to help farmers understand what is their impact today and how could they improve.
Okay, that's fascinating. So a couple questions on that. If you were to take out, like, let's say we lived in a world where there was none of this nitrous oxide based synthetic fertilizers.
Yep.
Is farming essentially carbon neutral? Because in the old days, because you're growing something that's capturing carbon, right? And then you're obviously expending some
Yeah.
energy to do so.
Definitely
What's your
could be. Definitely, like, it would have a much lower carbon footprint, but also the production and the ability to feed a population that's, growing to be 10 billion people, producing all these things that we do. Like, that's the trade, right? So if you want to be able to have cheap food, abundant, renewable fuel, the clothing that we're wearing, right? If it's based on cotton, those kind of things. Like, if you want these things that we are used to today, and as especially, being in America here, we spend about the lowest percentage of our dollar on food compared to any other country around the world. And it's a lot of it because we're really efficient in our agricultural system. We're able to produce a lot of stuff with not a lot of input. Now we need to balance it, right? Like, we need to be smarter about the fertilizers and the fuel that we are using, the things we are applying. So I don't think the answer is an extreme of get rid of all of it, but it is balance it a little bit better. And we've even seen, I'll point to, like, over in the Netherlands, they've been regulated to drastically cut their fertilizer, and it ended up being really bad for the farmers. And there was protests and stuff like that, and just a bad situation. I think here, the government's utilized more of the carrot rather than the stick to say, hey, here's a tool where you can quantify what your environmental impact is today. And then through the 45Z program, which we haven't talked about the details yet, but through a tax credit program like that, there is a carrot for farmers that wish to decarbonize, and they can really get there. And lastly, I'll say, even on our farm, our CI score, the normal farmer has a CI score. The default CI score is a 29, and I'm simplifying, but normal is a 29, and that is kilograms of CO2 equivalent per MMBTU. It's a biofuel equation, but the point being 29. Our farm last year had a score of 2.3. 0 is carbon neutral, right? Most farmers are plus 29. We were only plus 2. Last year, we had some of our corn that was a negative 4. So even with some of these practices, growing big yields, utilizing some of these fertilizers, we really can sustainably get to carbon neutral or even carbon negative, and be smarter about these inputs that we are applying.
Yeah.
So
I want to go through the story of how you got your own farm to perform with those dynamics. But before we do, just one follow up, just thought as you were giving your answer. I don't have the numbers at the top of my head, but I've seen this chart.
yeah,
And it is, if you have the numbers, I'm curious, like basically the yield per acre of American farms, like if you look back over 100 years, like the improvement has been incredible. And all the
yeah,
people who come up with these Malthusian forecasts of like, hey, we're going to run out of food and all the people are going to starve, they end up being wrong because the yields have gone up. Like, what are those? Do you have those numbers at the top of your head? And
it's something like 300x, right? Or
yeah,
300%. Sorry, 300%. So like 3x, right?
yeah,
So there's crazy stats, and yeah, I don't know them all off the top of my head either. But like, the average American farmer produces enough to feed like 168 people or something like that annually. So like, it used to be, right? It was like one family farm basically just fed themselves. It was kind of almost a 1-to-1 equation, or maybe one farmer to a 5-person family. Now it's one farmer to 160 some people, and going up every year. And yeah, I mean, it's amazing to be able to see, right? But it is better technology, and GMOs have a role to play in that, right? They've been able to help us do more with less and actually reduce our synthetic inputs. There's a balance to all this stuff, right? There's pros and cons to everything. And going down some of these rebels, not necessarily our core point here today. We could spend 6 hours talking if we wanted to, but we really have been able to do better with better crops themselves, better seeds, better research into the actual crops themselves, better utilization of fertilizer and of our inputs, factored in that the soil is a biological system, the soil is alive, and that by harnessing and working with Mother Nature rather than work against her, we can be more efficient that way. That's really been the key on my family's farm. But Yeah, just ag getting better and better and utilizing better technology and being smarter. So yeah, there's an argument to make, right? Where farm, like if you look at agriculture overall and our impact, our environmental impact per output, like we're doing incredible, right? And so is a lot of other areas of business and of the world, right? But the reality is we need to continue to be smarter. We can continue to be more efficient and not only focus on producing more, but focus on the how we are producing. And I
Yeah.
would argue that our agricultural system here is really efficient. We are able to get big yields very consistently, but it's led to these issues like water quality problems, like environmental footprint problems, like a lot of consolidation of a lot of farms and a lot of other businesses have led to the same thing, right? You can look at almost any sector and there's pros and cons of the American system, right? And how we've been as incentivized and how policy has played a role. I mean, you can look at the healthcare system. I mean, for sure, like the American healthcare system is pretty phenomenal, but there's plenty of flaws with it, right? American energy system, like we can have tremendous amounts of energy, low fertilizer prices compared to other places around the world, but there are pros and cons with it. So just as a couple quick examples that spitball off the top of my head, but
Yeah.
it's no different for ag. But what's cool, like I said, is now we at least have tools to quantify what is our impact, and we've got some systems emerging to actually reward changing the paradigm away from only a focus on productivity and yield to now focus on producing more with less of an environmental footprint. I think that's pretty awesome.
Yeah, absolutely. So why don't we do this? Why don't we go through how you go from 29 to 2,
Yeah,
and then let's talk about this 45Z incentive program. I feel like that would be a good
you bet.
sequence for this. So let's
So how
yeah.
we've done it on our farm, number one is using cover crops. So usually what farmers do is we plant, call it corn. We plant our corn in April. We harvest the corn in October. Then from October to April, usually nothing is out there. And then we plant our soybeans or the following crop the next April. Well, what we do with cover crops is we harvest the corn in October, then we plant a cover crop. Usually it's cereal rye or some type of grass and broadleaf mix of species. And those species are out there just to protect the soil, sequester carbon through photosynthesis, and basically act as a buffer for that soil with no intent to actually harvest it or for us to directly make money off of it. That's the definition of a cover crop. It's not supposed to be directly harvested for our financial purposes. So that cover crop sequesters carbon during what normally would be kind of the off period is the base concept. Reducing tillage is another key one. So the typical practice is you would harvest that crop in October, then you would till the soil to incorporate the leftover residue and stir it back into the soil to prepare the soil for the following year's crop. And this was the standard for forever. And for a lot of farms, it still is. So on our farm, we use no-till, where we leave the residue on the surface. Plus, like I said, we add the cover crop to it, but it basically provides armor for the soil and helps to avoid erosion and soil loss through wind and water. So we use that. We've reduced our synthetic fertilizer by, in some cases, 50%. So I talked about synthetic fertilizer has a big carbon footprint because of the nitrous oxide equation, and how it's accounted for. But we've reduced ours by a lot. So to put a number on that, the typical farm is applying about 200. Typical farm in my area applying about 230 to 250 pounds of nitrogen per acre, because the rule of thumb at the university says you apply 1 pound of nitrogen per 1 bushel of yield. Okay, so if you're yielding 250 bushel corn, the university science and general consensus would be to do 250 bushels of corn, you should apply 250 pounds of nitrogen. But on our farm, we're averaging 155 units of nitrogen, but still getting about the same yields. And it's because we're accounting for a enhanced soil system, better efficiencies, better nutrient cycling. Our soil is just healthier, and therefore we have to supplement it less. So that's been able to help us to decrease our fertilizer by a lot and decrease our carbon footprint. We've cut our diesel fuel usage as well. So not using tillage, not having these additional passes across the field that cuts our fertilizer, amongst other things, while at the same time getting good yield. So that's kind of the quick and dirty of it. But it really boils down to we're letting Mother Nature do her thing, and we don't have to be as invasive, which of course leads to a direct financial savings as well. Now we've got to account for the risk in a different manner than other farmers. So a lot of times putting on these inputs and additional fertilizer and stuff, it's an insurance tool. You'd rather have plenty on there versus fall short, so so much of this I relate back to human health as well. Like if you do the right things for your body, working out, eating right, whatever, you probably are going to get sick less. You're probably going to be healthier and live longer. You're probably going to be able to do it without spending as much money on medicine or on supplements and whatnot. Some of those things can help in the short term, but long term, they may not be sustainable. And really what is sustainable is what we're supposed to be doing as humans of, take care of yourself, sleep the right way, eat the right way, be active the right way, avoid really bad and invasive things like drugs or tobacco or too much alcohol, those kind of things, right? That throw your system out of whack. But we also know that, okay, we're probably going to screw some things up once in a while and do some of those things. But if you're doing more good than bad, you're at least moving in a positive trajectory. So that's how we think about it. And now there's just better tools to quantify all this stuff as well, right? Look at generations past, they didn't necessarily understand all of this stuff, and still not, plenty of folks today don't understand it or just don't want to do it. Same thing in ag, changing and doing things different, doing things healthier can be hard. But we've been able to find a way to make it work and now be able to tell our story and open up opportunities, for the 45Z program or other sustainability linked initiatives.
Yeah. So a couple quick follow-ups on that. So when you say tillage, is that essentially when you take a giant machine and you like twist the soil up and down, like the classic farming picture? Okay.
That's right.
Okay.
So think of it, like you've got these big metal shanks, that are kind of ripping through the soil, that usually it would open that soil up and mix in the residue and stuff on top, kind of like how you'd maybe do composting and stuff, or when you think of preparing a garden, right? Like, or planting flowers in your front yard, like usually you kind of dig that soil up and kind of open it up to be able to put that new plant down into it. We do it with no tillage and try to not disturb that soil at all and just leave that living ecosystem alone.
And the two main interventions that you described that got you to, reduce the fertilizer that you're using and got your score from 29 to 2 were cover crops and no tillage.
Yeah.
Why don't other farmers or all the farmers around the world use these practices?
Yep. Because they're risky to do them. It's a great question. So in the whole U.S., and I think these are just row crop stats, but in the U.S., there's about 5% of farmers that are using cover crops. 5%. There's only about 33% that are using no-till. There's I just saw a thing the other day, like 78% of farmers are doing some type of reduced tillage though. So there's, call it 25% full conventional, till it like they used to do back in the day. 50% that are kind of in the middle, and then 25 to a third of us that are no-till. The concern has been that doing these things, if you don't do it the right way, you can end up hurting your yield. You can end up hurting your profitability. So by cover crop, for example, we are harvesting a crop in the fall, then we plant a crop out there that then we're going to plant our crop into the following spring. So you're planting your crop into a green growing mat of cover crops in a lot of cases. So a lot of farmers look at that as that's a weed out there, and you're going to have competition between that cover crop and your cash crop. They're both going to be competing for the same moisture, for the same nutrients, for the same carbon dioxide that they're trying to take in through photosynthesis. And they're just the space out there. You're basically creating competition. And when we're in a production focused system, you don't want to have competition, right? You want to have monocrop, you want to have consistency. Um, and so you can screw things up. And we screwed things up on our farm too. When in our early years of changing these practices, we lost yield, we lost money. But it's because it's a learning curve to be able to adopt these things, and it takes time. There are more and more farmers that are adopting these things. We are seeing a good trajectory. In my county here of Southeast Iowa, we're at about 20% adoption of cover crops and more than 50%, almost 70% adoption of no-till. So, right, compared to the national numbers of 5% cover crop and a third no-till, here we're 20% cover crop and more than 50% no-till. So you can get better adoption. It just takes some time too to change. I relate it back to almost all humans know that we need to eat right and work out and get the right amount of sleep, but not that many people do that, so
Yeah.
it's the same thing as on the farm, right? And then if you're in a bad state right now and you say, well, I'm going to get on a diet and get on a workout plan. Well, if you don't know what you're doing, you might end up doing more harm than good, or go backwards at the beginning and get frustrated or not want to do it, or undergo hardship by changing. You can hire somebody, a dietitian or a personal trainer, whatever, that knows what they're doing, that's going to help you to not maybe have those setbacks, but that takes time and money, and it likely is better for you in the long term. But in the short term, it's, what type of hardship do you want to undergo? Same thing for the farmer.
Yeah. It's like in the moment, the individually rational play
Yeah.
is to maximize yield. And the way to do that is to till and use a bunch of synthetic fertilizer and go for it.
That's how we've always done it, right?
Yeah.
So it's just like in any business, right? So it's how do you, how does any business, maximize their bottom line profitability, because that's what moves the needle on the New York Stock Exchange, and that's what gets them personally bonuses and makes it happy with the board of directors and stuff, right? It's short term gains that may or may not necessarily align with the long term. And same thing here on the farm. But there's more and more farmers that are catching on, right? There's more awareness, more folks that are coming to the realization that they probably need to change and need to do better. It's, a lot of human health is doing the same thing, right? It might look different than what was preached to humans in the past, but there's more and more people becoming aware that, hey, you can do better, and maybe it won't be as painful of a change as maybe what it once was, or
Yeah.
what it once appeared to be anyway.
Yeah. And if you were to put aside the question of the carbon, let's say we weren't concerned about carbon, or nitrous oxide or methane, whatever, all these different gases. The business case for doing sort of more responsible farming, like the no-till and the cover crops, is that you have better soil health. Is that the story basically?
Yeah, so I mean, it's my family story. We've only been able to actually get paid for our low carbon farming practices once. So we did on our 2023 crop. We will be able to get paid a small amount on our 2024 crop, but both of these are very minimal payments. To put a number to it, what would it be? The total impact on our top line is going to be maybe 2%. So of all the money that we come in, only 2% of that revenue is going to be attributed to carbon. Now with 45Z, it might be able to get closer to 10%. Some farmers might be able to get close to 15%, but still it's a small percentage. Then the yield itself and productivity is going to drive all the rest of your revenue.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's before it was just about, hey, can we, if we don't have to spend the money on the fertilizer to get the same yield, we don't want to over apply. And most farmers too, I think they realize they're applying the things that they are because they think that is sustainable. They think that they are applying the correct amount. They don't want to over apply. Now they might err on that, like I said, as insurance, because typically it's cheaper to just put on a little bit more versus go backwards and have the yield loss. But on our farm, we've been able to utilize technology, utilize quantification, and to help us actually make a better decision about what's working, what's not. Again, just like on human health, like sure, you can just start a workout plan or whatever and think you're moving in the right direction, but you probably want to get on a scale at the beginning and then periodically get on a scale to see if you're making any progress, right? If your metric for success is losing weight, or if it's going to be a different success metric, you probably want to quantify it and see change over time. The problem is most farmers, the quantification metric is the yield, which is very easy for us to quantify, very known. We're pretty good at it. We've done it for a long time, and you get paid based on the yield. So now to change that the metric is different, it just takes time to adopt that. And most farmers aren't aware, just like in human health, there's probably all kinds of indicators that would be a better indication of my human health than just me stepping on a scale, right? Or the info that my Apple Watch is giving me, right? Like it may not be the best things, but like I don't know. I'm not a doctor. I'm not in that space,
Yeah.
So I just don't know. And I haven't spent enough time to try to research and figure it out.
Definitely. Question on the synthetic fertilizer before we talk about 45Z.
Yeah.
You said it a few times. The audience is probably like,
We're
what
getting
the hell?
there. We're getting there. We're
Look at
keeping.
that. Well, this is an important question. Yeah, this is an important question, which is if you were to look at the budget of one of the 80,000 farms that still exist, what percentage of it is being spent on fertilizer?
About 25%, I think, is kind of the generic rule of thumb, right? So say on average that a farmer is going to spend $850 to $1,000 a year. Some might be even more than that. You're talking, $200, $250, maybe $300 an acre. So yeah, it's significant. So I mean, think of it as probably at least 25% of your expenses, maybe a little bit more, would be to land. And then fertilizer is probably your next highest expense. And then seed is probably after that. And then like chemical and chemical would probably be after that one. So, but I think rule of thumb would be around that, 25%.
So
On
super,
our farm,
super meaningful number. Yeah.
Yeah, on our farm, I think our percentage is probably still about that, but we've been able to decrease just all of our expenses for the most part. Like land is fairly stable and going up. Like we can't really always control that one. But our fertilizer, we've been able to cut. We've been able to get creative to cut our seed costs as well. We've been able to decrease our pesticide usage our chemical usage by about 75%. So, I mean, we're talking just, a couple of these items, but we've actually been able to really holistically reduce as well.
And the pesticide one, how were you able to achieve that reduction?
So part of that is like the cover crop itself can help to suppress other weeds and can help to harbor beneficial insects or can help to suppress disease and stuff. These things all take time, right? So this synthetic fertilizer decrease that we've been talking about, that takes 5 to 10 years to be able to get to the point that we are. And we've spent a lot of money on data and like I'm really deep into this space, but a lot of other farmers have had similar success to us. Pesticide decreases and whatnot. Again, you're talking 3-5 years or more. These things take time. It's just like on the human health side of things. Like maybe you can get your diet to get you all the nutrition that you need, but in the short term, maybe you take a vitamin or a supplement to be able to get there. You might be able to wean yourself off, but you're probably not going to be able to wean yourself off right away. It's going to take time to be able to get there. Same thing on the medicine or fixing problems. Like you might get sick a lot at the beginning, then maybe you get your human health built up over time, and then it's rare that you have to utilize that. So it's all the same. It takes time to change a system and change a paradigm. But if you can endure that change and get through to the other side, like you can be much better off because of it.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, well let's get into 45Z.
Yeah.
We made it there. Tell us about the program.
The thing is, the 45Z piece, why I love it is it's the biggest carrot to enable that paradigm shift that I was just talking about. Okay. Yeah. the story we've been talking about, right? It sounds great. And you asked the question, why aren't all farmers doing this? Well, same thing of why aren't all people doing what we're supposed to be doing for human health, right? That's the answer. But now there's a better carrot to incentivize change, and it's the 45Z tax credit. This tax credit was part of the Inflation Reduction Act, which was passed by the Biden administration in August of 2022. The 45Z credit is a clean biofuel production tax credit. So it is for producers of transportation biofuels, such as ethanol, biodiesel, sustainable aviation fuel. These producers can earn the tax credit. In the US, that is there's about 17 billion gallons of ethanol produced every year, and about 3 billion gallons of biodiesel and renewable diesel. This year, there was only about 17 million gallons of sustainable aviation fuel that was produced, so much, much lower, right? Ethanol, 17 billion. Sustainable aviation fuel, only 17 million. However, the government and the industry, I guess, their goal is to be at 35 billion gallons of sustainable aviation fuel produced by 2050 and be at 3 billion gallons by the end of this decade. So we're at 17 million today, but the demand there and the projected increase is freaking huge, even bigger than the total US biofuel industry here today. So this credit rewards the decarbonization of those biofuels, not the production. There used to be old tax credits that just rewarded the production. If you produce biofuel and you blend it in with fossil fuel, we'll give you a credit, right? That's how the programs work today. It's just based on production, just like the ag stuff we've been talking about. But now they're saying, nope, it's not just about producing the biofuel, but you got to lower the carbon footprint of that biofuel. How it works is that the biofuel will have a carbon intensity score associated to every gallon. It's basically the carbon footprint. We've been talking about it. The CI score for corn, the default is 29. My corn was a 2.3. Ethanol has a CI score on average of 53. It's the US average. Gasoline, fossil fuel gasoline, has a score of 98 for context. Okay, so gasoline's a 98, ethanol is a 53. Corn is about 29 of those 53 points. So the corn is more than half, but corn like mine has a score of 2. And at Continuum Ag, we've scored 350 million bushels of corn and 350 million bushels. And the average score that we've seen is 11.5. Okay, and for context, like on our farm, say we produce 100,000 bushels on our farm. We've scored 350 million bushels. Average score is 11.5. So even that is a significant decrease from the default of 29 down to 11.5. So the biofuel producers now are able to quantify their annual footprint. So it's based on a weighted average of your entire year worth of production. You have to get it audited. You got to go through your CPA firm and be able to get an opinion letter. But biofuel producers can create these tax credits to then lower their tax liability to pay less into their annual income tax and pass along the savings basically to the farmers or other means of decarbonization. Farmers are only part of it. They can do other things to decarbonize, more renewable energy, carbon capture. There's lots of different ways that they can lower their footprint, but more than half of the emission is the corn. And what I'm saying is it's also a huge potential part of the solution. So it's bringing a lot of collaboration now between farmers and biofuel producers. The problem is, as we sit here today, still in the early part of 2025, we don't have the rules. And we just had, of course, a change of control in the White House. We've got all new people coming in because the law was passed in August of 2022. The legislative branch passed the law. Then it's the executive branch's role to implement the law, right? And since this is a tax credit, it falls under the jurisdiction of the IRS and therefore under the Department of Treasury. Well, we've got a new Secretary of the Treasury who has got to be sworn in. He's got to get the new team in place, and then they got to go and actually roll out the final rules and stuff here. So it's going to take some time to get that done. And they can work with their incoming folks over at the Department of Energy and work with the folks at the Department of Agriculture, but it's going to take some time to get all this done. But yeah, 45Z, low carbon biofuel, farmers buying on average, right? We're about half of the equation. And now there's an opportunity to work together to decarbonize. And what I love about it is it's setting a precedent about not only decarbonizing biofuel, but a precedent that can be used as we look to decarbonize other sectors as well. Those, agriculture, of course, is part of nearly every supply chain, but even outside of agriculture, this is just setting a precedent here now of government coming in to say, here's how you can quantify it, here's how you verify and audit it, here's how you track the value throughout the supply chain, and here's the financial compensation that you would earn for decarbonizing. So it just sets a precedent that I think it will, as long as we can get the final rules done with the Trump administration and they work pretty decent, it's going to change global agriculture. And that's why I'm so bullish on it, and why when I saw this 2.5 years ago, I completely flipped my company on its head and I bet everything to see this through. And because I'm at the core of being able to see this through for my own farm. And I see this as an opportunity for my own family farm in the short term, but also that we're going to be living in this world for the rest of my life. I'm 30 years old as we record this. Like, I'm going to be dealing with this forever. My son and daughter are, my son is 1.5, my daughter's 3. Like, they're the 8th generation on the farm, and the next 8 generations come. Like, it's all going to continue to be about sustainability, about data, about being able to be smarter with it. And this is just, I think, the jumping off point that's going to make everything change.
Yeah. And when it comes to this government position, the issue is that they haven't come up with the formula basically to say the tax credits are worth this and here's how you get them. Is that it?
Yeah. No, we have that. Okay. So we have the formula. We have the general guidelines of the rule, but what we don't yet have is some of the specific, like, here's the final rule. They've drafted the rule.
Got it.
They've said, here's what we're thinking, here's what we plan on doing, but the Biden IRS published a intent to propose a rule, and it included the draft language of that rule. So I'm not a policy expert, right? But I'm having to become one because of all this stuff. And usually they write a policy and then they ask for public comment and then they can finalize the policy after that. Well, these guys they didn't even publish the primary rule or a preliminary rule. They published a intent to propose a rule and then the draft language that they had so far. And it was okay. There's some good stuff in there. And over the last year, they've put out an array of different documents. So we're piecing together what the rule looks like, but it hasn't been finalized yet. And the biggest thing that was missing is the farmer component. It's called the feedstock calculator. So the feedstock is the whatever is utilized to produce the fuel, in this case, corn or soybeans, right? And those specific rules are what's missing. The USDA, although not the authority of this tax credit, because the tax credit, right, under the authority of the IRS, Department of Treasury, but the USDA said, hey, we'll help you out and we will write a rule that is our proposal of what we think you should do. And, from our view over here, across the road at the Department of Ag, here's what we would do if we were you. And they did write that. And that was a preliminary rule. So it has a little bit more teeth in it, but they're not the authority, right? So ultimately it's going to be the Trump administration's got to get fully in, kind of get their feet underneath them, and then basically take an audit of here's all the documents that have already been kind of proposed. Here's the feedback that we are getting through the public comment period, which now is open in the IRS, and the U.S. Department of Ag opened one as well. So now we're providing comments and feedback into that then they can ingest and write the final rules. The USDA had already taken public comment. They opened up like a 45-day public comment period in the summer of 2024. That was followed up by 3 different sessions of verbal comment as well to be able to get on Zoom meeting and they let everybody go around and speak your piece for a couple minutes. And of course, we were very involved in that whole process, but now we got to basically do it again. and so it just takes time. It's frustrating, but like I'm saying, though, this rule could have monumental global impact. So it needs to be done right. But also, I think a lot of times we sacrifice good enough and letting the ball roll. We sacrifice that for perfection, and perfection takes more time. And no matter how the rules end up, there's going to be different groups that don't think that they're perfect and want to change them. And we're going to have to continue to make modifications in the years to come. So it needs to get done and get off the ground, even though it's, get it as close to great as we can, because farmers definitely need it and fuels need it. American energy needs it. We need to decarbonize. We need to do better. And again, farmers can be a part of that solution.
Yeah. The story is fascinating. It's like a perfect case study for sort of why it's important to, I don't agree with everything that is being proposed by the new administration, but
Yep.
I do agree with this idea of like, hey, we should look at the efficiency of the government, because we're several years into this. It was a program that sort of everyone's on board with, right? Like it's not really even a political question at this point,
Yeah.
as far as, people wanting to support this particular activity.
Yeah.
And now it's just a matter of getting it done and changing the incentive structure of the market.
Which is good business too, right? So, I mean, being efficient in our government obviously needs to, like, the trajectory that we're on right now is awful for us as young people and for future generations. Like, it can't go on forever, and like it's gonna be really freaking bad when we do finally get called to change, or when we default on our loans or whatever. Like, it's gonna be really, really bad, and we got to try to avoid that. Now, yeah, they've got a long way to go, and they're going to screw things up, and not all of it's going to be great. But we got to be thinking about these things just in business, in our own lives. Like sitting back and doing an audit once in a while is just a smart idea anyway. And government needs to do this. Our businesses, our personal lives, like we need to do these things, and then also look at, hey, what is really good, again, not only in the short term but in the long term too, or what's hard in the short term that's going to set us up for success in the long term. Like we need to do that throughout a lot of different pieces of government, but of our lives as well. And yeah, this 45Z deal, it's narrow, right, to biofuels, transportation biofuels, but in the US, a third of the corn that we produce goes to biofuel, and like nearly half of the soybeans. It is a massive amount of the crop that we produce here. And again, it's the precedent that this sets is why I'm so bullish on it. But also, I think it's important for people to know too, like when corn goes to an ethanol plant, on average, 1 bushel of corn, which is 56 pounds of corn, 1 bushel of corn produces 2.9 gallons of ethanol. Okay, so I can produce 2.9 gallons of ethanol that is cheaper than fossil fuel and now has a significantly lower carbon footprint to it. But also coming out of that ethanol plant is what we call DDGs, or they're distillers grains, which is basically the leftover corn material, more of a, it can be dried to like a powdery kind of feed for animals. So that fuel comes out of the ethanol plant, that feed comes out of the ethanol plant. There's other gases and other liquids and stuff that come out that can be used for all kinds of different purposes, including just pure alcohol, like Tito's vodka comes from an ethanol plant. They have got to purify it, another step beyond what's put in the gas tank, but that's an example. A lot of other cleaning agents and stuff, that are utilizing alcohols, like it's the same, it's all coming from the same process. So I think important to note that there's always a lot of, there's an argument, right, about food versus fuel and stuff. But in reality, a lot of these things, like we've gotten really good at being able to produce a lot all off the same bushel, therefore all off the same acres. And is corn going to be the end all be all for forever and ever? No, it hasn't been historically. Like, it's probably not going to be in the future, but it's the way that our system's set up right now.
Yeah.
And we're pretty dang good at growing it. And again, we got to do it better than what we've done in the past, but we can produce a heck of a lot of it for pretty dang cheap. Yeah. Is some of it subsidized? Is some of it, propped up by government? Yeah. But we're not near as propped up as most of the countries around the world. And I shouldn't say most, but a lot of countries around the world have way more government involved than what we do here. And there's a balance to it. I would actually love for government not to be as involved. Because I think as a young farmer, like, there's a lot of these programs that don't necessarily always promote good business, and sometimes they allow for not great things to continue to happen. Through bailouts and that kind of thing. We've seen that historically, and not just farming, but in, again, lots of other rabbit holes that can be got into of where government intervening has sometimes enabled bad behavior, or incentivized bad behavior.
Yeah, definitely. Well, that's for sure. On this one, you mentioned some staggering stats. I didn't realize it, that a third of the corn and half of the soy is being used already. And I was thinking back earlier, you had mentioned sort of like the government's goals around the number of gallons of this different types of fuels.
Yeah.
Like, is that even possible? Like,
It's
the current
crazy. Yeah,
production?
yeah.
Yeah.
So that's why I'm like thinking about this, right? Of like, holy crap. Like, the way that the world is going here to try to get off of fossil fuels to go be more sustainable, like, how are we going to actually do that? Something like in the US right now, we consume like I might get some of these numbers wrong. We maybe need to look them up, but it's something like we consume already like 100 billion gallons of jet fuel annually in the US. 100 billion gallons annually. We're trying to just get a third of that to be produced with sustainable aviation fuel. Like, it's insane to think about the amount of fossil fuel that we are actually utilizing every year. Now, obviously, they continue to find more of it and like stuff like that. That's a different thing. But like, we use a freaking pile of it. And like, insane to think about some of the stats I've heard of, like what would it be? The US military, the amount of like fuel that they use for all their like jets and aircraft stuff, insane numbers here. So they got to try to figure out how to decarbonize, how to make their fuel cheaper, how to not be reliant on, especially a lot of outside countries that we buy a lot of these fuels from, like, and some of them that are not necessarily people that we want to be paying money to. That, again, different rabbit holes we don't need to go down. But so the goal is to be at 35 billion gallons of sustainable aviation fuel by 2050. One of the ways you can produce sustainable aviation fuel is use ethanol. Okay. There's about in 1 gallon of ethanol can be converted to about it takes about 1.7 gallons of ethanol to produce 1 gallon of sustainable aviation fuel. Okay. Because my understanding of it is ethanol, it's a carbon, everything's about carbon, right? It's a carbon molecule, but it's like 2 carbons or something like that. And jet fuel is 12 carbons. So it takes a lot more of the 2 carbon molecules to make a 12 carbon, right? That's my base understanding of it. I'm not a chemist. But 1.7 gallons of ethanol per gallon of sustainable aviation fuel. So if we went all electric on our vehicles, right, we didn't need ethanol in our vehicles anymore, and we put all 17 billion gallons of US ethanol all to sustainable aviation fuel, that's 17 billion gallons of ethanol at 1.7 gallons per gallon of SAF. That means we're only producing 10 billion gallons of SAF. 10 billion gallons of SAF is a heck of a long way away from the 35 billion gallons that we need. So even if we took every gallon of ethanol that we produce in this country, which is a third of the corn, turn all of it into sustainable aviation fuel, we're still only a third of the way there. And like, we can't take 100% of the corn to turn it into that, because we got to do everything else with it. Right. And feeding livestock and animals and exports and all these other things that we make with corn. And then we need other crops to do it. You can use soybeans, and you can use, they call it HEFA. You can use other oils like palm oil and stuff. You can use cooking oil. There's been a lot of negatives on the used cooking oil piece because there's a lot of fraud in that space of what is quote unquote used cooking oil, and a lot of it just happening to come out of China that may or may not actually be used cooking oil, but that's a different thing. But anyway, the point being is if we're going to actually be able to hit even just that one target of 35 billion gallons of SAF every year, the undertaking to be able to get that done, and we have 25 years to do it, is just absolutely insurmountable. And it takes some of these strong policies to be able to actually enable it. And we're going to need all the cards on the table. So, I mean, and some of this, okay, maybe we are going to be able to get away from liquid fuels going in our cars and trucks and road transport. But still, like, for airlines and stuff, I know there's a lot of push for electrification and whatnot of that, but like, we're going to also need that electricity for, if we are going to be driving electric vehicles, like, and electricity for all this AI stuff and everything. Like, it's all, of course, getting better. It's getting more efficient. Like, it's moving in that direction, but gosh darn, like, to do all of it it's going to be monumental tasks that we're up against here. And we got to decarbonize all of it. And my take is, okay, we're sure there's going to be more and more electric vehicles, but like, not anytime. It's not going to be just a 0 to 100 right now. So while we're using fuel in our tanks, like, let's decarbonize that and let's be smarter with what we are putting in there. We're going to continue to do it for a long time. And, the world doesn't just, again, paradigms don't change overnight. And that's really kind of the theme of this entire deal is, like, it doesn't just, you can't just go from 0 to 100.
Yeah. Man, so interesting. Well, I have a bunch of other questions, but we're sort of running out of time. But
sorry, I get
no, it's okay. Maybe what we could do is this, if you're up for it. I'm going to ask like some rapid fire questions that may or may not even be related to each other, but I've never spoken to an agricultural expert before, and it's just stuff that is on my mind, and I think will be interesting for our audience because we've covered a lot of industries and a lot of the sort of ties between environmentalism and politics and economics. So we've even had one famous investor on the podcast, Jim Rogers, who was so bullish on ag. He basically spent the entire podcast saying, like, everyone should quit what they're doing and focus on ag and invest in agriculture because that's the future.
That's
awesome.
So
yeah, which is super interesting. So how about
a few? Talk to him, I think.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. You down for a few questions?
Yeah. Let's do it.
Okay, cool. All right. So the first one is one of the things I've been hearing sort of in the podcast circuit is that there's a lot of concern about the sustainability of the soil itself. And there's, views that are really like pessimistic. Like I've heard even some views saying like, hey, we got like 50, 60 cycles left of global soil health, and then it's your desert land. What is your take on that?
Yeah, I think some of those are really extreme, right? We hear some of these really extreme notions about it all the time. We're going to continue to do better, right? It's just like we were talking before. The yield continues to do better. We're actually not going to just run out of all this stuff. But the same thing on these soils. Sorry, these guys. Sorry. Our soils, have they been degraded severely? Yes. But we've been able to prove on our own farm that we can turn them around. And to put some numbers on that, like a core metric of soil health is organic matter. It's basically the amount of carbon that's in the soil, or to an extent. Say in my neck of the woods, the organic matter through the natural prairie system and the buffalo and all that, right? The organic matter around here was probably 8%, 7-8% on average. Some areas would have been higher than that, call it 10, 12%. And today we've gone from that, call it 7%, down to an average of about 3%. So we've lost a significant portion of that organic matter and of that carbon and that health of the soil. But on our farm, we've been able to track that we've seen fields go from about 3.5% to over 5% organic matter in like a 10-year period. So now it's taken the cover crops and the no-till and the practices that we talked about before. We call them the principles of soil health. You actually can get this turned around and do significantly better. We see success stories like that all over the place, even in the deserts, even in the soils that are started off at an even better spot than mine. You really can turn it around, but farmers need to become a lot more aware of that. And right now, the problem is we're incentivized just for yield and for short-term production, not necessarily looking at the long term here. Some farmers would probably just say, nah, this soil's, we've been farming it for 150 years. We're going to keep farming it for 150 years. We're going to keep doing all this bad stuff to work like we're doing today. Well, there's a meet in the middle here, right? Of like, we got to be smarter about what we are putting on and what we are applying. But I think humans are pretty resilient. We're pretty smart. There'll be some farms that, got to be converted back into some kind of a native system for a couple of years to be recuperated, and then they can be cropped again, or things like that. But I think humans will keep figuring it out, and we can improve it. Our farm's a testament to that.
Yeah. What's worse for the environment, the pesticides or the fertilizers?
The fertilizer. But it depends on what aspect, right? So if you're talking about carbon footprint stuff, definitely fertilizer. If you're talking about water quality, probably also fertilizer. Pesticides, that'd be really on the biodiversity and ecology side of things, right? Like there's a stat that says something about if you're spraying an insecticide, you're killing basically 1,700 beneficials for every bad guy that you're going after, every bad bug that you're going after. So there's a lot of good things out there that we're killing with the bad. Same thing as human health, right? What do we do when you got a bad bug, right? You take an antibiotic. Well, you're targeting maybe one bad species with the antibiotic, but there's no way that antibiotic is actually only screwing up your gut in that one species, right? Same thing here. Same thing. So the thing with the pesticides is we have been able to decrease them significantly, but they lead to plenty of bad as well. Again, it's just like in human health. But both of them need to be managed, I think, in appropriate context. I'm not in the camp that it should be an extreme get rid of all of it. Just like in human health, if you didn't take any medicine ever, no vaccines ever, no antibiotics ever, right? You only try to do it with food as medicine. Could you do it? And can some people do it? Absolutely. Same thing for farming without this stuff. You can do it, absolutely. But it's really freaking tough to be able to do it like that. And it takes a big learning curve to do it for human health and for soil health.
What's your take on GMOs?
We use GMOs for a lot of our crop. Corn, something like it's like 92% of the corn grown in this country is GMO, 96% of the cotton, 89% of the soybeans. Like, it's all GMO. Now, my take, GMO it's a genetically modified organism. It's the definition, right? Genetically enhanced is a lot of times what we kind of consider it too, that it's plugging in better DNA that's going to improve the vigor of this. All living creatures go through this hybridization and selection, right? And humans procreating with other folks that, hopefully making us better and stronger and more vigorous over time too. Now, we've probably led to some of the opposite of that in some cases as well, right? But that's a genetics talk. But on the GMO side, is there some bad to them? Definitely, maybe. I think there probably is with a lot of different things, but it's done a tremendous amount of good. We were talking about that yield increase that we're seeing. A huge amount of that is due to better breeding, genetically enhancing these crops to make them better. Our decrease, I mentioned a decrease of 75% pesticide decrease. It's because of GMOs. Like, we would not be able to have that type of decrease without having some of the technology built into the plant itself to be smarter. And what I mean by that is the core GMO, it's called BT, Bacillus thuringiensis, something like that, long-winded words. But it basically allows the plant itself to not be susceptible to a worm eating it, an insect eating it. It fends it off by itself. If we didn't have that, people would be spraying the insecticide to kill those worms and thus kill a lot of other things in the meantime, right? But now the plant does it itself and fends it off itself, and we don't have to spray the chemical. So again, there's pros and cons to all this stuff. We have actually been experimenting a lot with getting rid of some of these technologies. We've done some non-GMO soybeans. We've done some non-GMO corn. Like we really are trying to, like I said, we've decreased our pesticide 75%. We've decreased our fertilizer 50%. We've experimented with getting rid of GMOs as well. But the carrot isn't great to incentivize that. And we would have to make some other major changes in our system to account for it. Just like on the human health side, like I keep relating back to, but hopefully it helps the audience here. If you were to not use medicine at all, right? Anytime you got sick, you weren't going to use medicine. You were just going to be focused on your diet. You could do that, but gosh, it's going to take some time to like get there. And maybe you got to, learn from somebody else or experiment with that for a while to figure it out.
Yeah. And is the issue with GMOs on the concern side, like that we were creating a species that could become incredibly vulnerable and die out in 1 year?
Maybe I think it's more so we're messing with DNA, right? And we're playing God a little bit to mess with some of this stuff. I think part of it is probably the extremes of that, right? And playing around with DNA. I mean, you look at in anything, cloning or some of the AI stuff that's going on or something like this same type of things, maybe technology going too far. It happens not just in ag, but could it be used for good, and has it led to a lot of good? Yeah, but maybe it is causing other issues too. I mean, you open up a can of worms and all this stuff. Like, what has our medicine done to our gut? What has vaccines done? What has the air that we breathe and all, like the water, or even the cleaning agents that we put in our water, right? We're cleaning our water to make it healthier. Is that screwing us up? Or pasteurizing milk to get rid of the pathogen? Like all these things, like I don't know. They were done for a good reason, but they might be leading to things that are not necessarily good either.
Yeah. Is organic BS or is it legit?
Some of it can be legit. Here's my number one issue is that a lot of farmers, they do organic. And by organic means no synthetic fertilizer, no pesticides, some of these things we've been talking about that we've decreased. But to account for that, then most organic farms use a lot of tillage to suppress the weeds or to suppress the insects and stuff, or they have a lot of insects and disease just on the crop. It's part of it. And maybe that's leading to not great things that we're putting in our food supply either. And the tillage is really the piece that I don't like, right? The water issues that you're going to lead to, the erosion issues going to lead to losing the carbon from the soil, losing the life out of that soil, losing the biodiversity that's in that soil and the plant's ability to interact correctly with the microbiology. So I have major concerns about the tillage piece of it, where on our farm, sure, we're utilizing some of those pesticides at a great reduced rate, but we're not disturbing the soil to try to build up the soil health, build up the carbon. Ultimate is when you can do regenerative organic. That's the ultimate. Guys like Rick Clark, who's a good buddy of mine, he's been able to do that with some solid success. But gosh, it's hard. Like really freaking hard to be able to do that. Right? Like again, back to the holistic medicine stuff, or like being able to get yourself off of these bad, additional medicines or bad stuff. Like, can you do it? Yeah. But is it really hard? Really hard.
Yeah. Okay, last question. And you've mentioned this a bunch of times in this conversation, and it's something that is sort of top of mind whenever you look at the politics of farming or the discussion around the politics of farming. You mentioned how hard it is.
Yeah.
And we could probably do a whole podcast on this, but just from an economic standpoint, how hard is it for the American farmer to make money, given all these constraints and issues that they're facing?
I think the average farm in the U.S. is about 400 acres, but let's say even a farm like mine, right, where we're call it 1,000 acres for easy math. Say if we've got 1,000 acres and we're growing, say a typical yield of 200 bushel the acre. Today, that's worth maybe, let's call it $4.25 a bushel is what that's worth right now. So you're going to have total top line revenue of $850 per acre. And you're going to have expenses, call it around $700 an acre. A lot of farms are going to be higher than that. Like I'm talking my farm. So make $850, but spend $700 to do it. $850 on 1,000 acres, $850,000 an acre coming in, or a year coming in. Pretty dang good. But if you've got expenses of just about all that, or say you've got $100 or $150 an acre at the end of the day still left, you might be able to make $100,000 on 1,000 acres. But then out of the $100,000, you also got to pay for your own time, pay for your food, pay for your living expenses, pay for your family that's also involved, all the labor stuff, like pay for all your other expenses. Like you can do well, but that's 1,000 acre farm. The US average is 400 acres. So take that number of maybe making $100,000 at the end of the day, take that down by a lot. My farm is 40 acres. Like there's no way the math works on that with we're talking about conventional farming, right? But it's a lot of work for not much money coming back. And those numbers were like pretty optimistic. A lot of cases, the bottom line math isn't near that good. And say, for example, like on my farm, my land expense is $500 per acre because I bought this farm a couple of years ago. It's on a mortgage, 20-year mortgage. So my land is $500 an acre. My fertilizer, usually, as said before, usually farms are $200, $250. We've got ours decreased to closer to, I don't know, it'd be about 100, 125. My seed, I've been able to get down, closer to 100 or less than $100 an acre. And like, when you start talking higher land expenses, like a lot of farms are on, that 850 or maybe $1,000 an acre top line revenue, it gets eaten up real fast.
Yeah, and in the case of like a 40-acre farm, it's like that's like minimum wage or something at the end of the day, right?
Not even, if you can pocket anything. But part of it, why do we do it, right? I think a lot of farms look at like, geez, you got to be big to be able to make the bottom line work and actually take home some stuff. You got to kind of be grandfathered in and set up well, likely to be able to do that. Like starting from scratch. If you're going to do conventional row crop acre farming, like it's going to be tough, really tough to be able to do it.
Yeah, you got to buy it. Yeah, just to buy the land.
Figure buying an acre of land, right? So if you're going to buy an acre of land, say that's going to be right now, $16,000, $17,000 an acre at 1,000 acres being at like probably kind of like, if you're going to be conventional, like that's probably a pretty good target. 1,000 acres at $17,000 an acre. It's a freaking lot of money. And that's just the land. That doesn't include the tractors, the combines, the storage of this stuff, all the rest of the equipment that's going to take, plus your actual annual inputs. Like it's a really freaking expensive business that a lot of us, we do it because long term, you can build up some equity in the land, right? Land is a pretty good appreciating asset. So long term, it can pay off in that way. But yeah, the year to year, we've had to really take those tweaks, right, and dial in our fertilizer spend and our other items to, be able to find those components that really impact us on a year to year annual basis. Also, talking about the 45Z credit has the opportunity to put 50, 75, maybe $100 an acre in the farmer's pocket. And I was talking before, like good case scenario, bottom line is maybe $100. So you start talking about increasing that by 50 to 100%. That's why I mean, like the impact that it can make if it's done well, to start getting more folks to change their paradigm and change their system. Like that carrot is big enough that I think people will continue to come to the table, and I'm already seeing it happening.
Nice. Well, thank you so much, Mitchell, for all your time today. This has been a fascinating conversation.
Been fun.
Scratching the surface of all the interesting questions around ag. We might have to do another episode, but thank you so much. And I'll be keeping my fingers crossed that the powers that be do the right thing on 45Z. And
we're going to be pushing on them. We're going to be hammering on them. Cross our fingers, but we are hammering on them because who we elect matters, right? Policy matters a lot, and the implications are, it's crazy when you start digging into the implications of these decisions, and these folks that are in power, like they're impacting a lot of people's lives with their decisions. So
definitely. Well, thank you so much, man. I appreciate your time.
Been great. Good to hang. We'll talk to you later.
Yep.